Funny enough, when we started CrewAI, some of our investors called me like borderline crazy because I said, we have no other option other than build all of it. And they're like, well, you cannot do all of it. I was like, well, we got to. There's no other option. Doing something simple is harder. And I think a lot of engineers don't necessarily grasp that unless they're like more senior and seasoned, right? They have been in this for a while. Projects get built, but they never see the light of day. They're not accessing the right data, because they're exposing data that they should not to, because they don't have a way to monitor and deploy this, because they don't trust it. That's it in the end of the day. They don't trust it for whatever reason, right?
Let's switch gears toward more of entrepreneurship. So you are a first-time founder. What is your advice to an AI founder?
So if you're a first-time founder, you need to make sure that you build a very strong case why you are the right person for them to bet on. But these investors, they're not numb, right? If anything, they're very smart people and they're savvy and they have seen some of these waves come and go. First check that you're gonna get is gonna probably be more of a bet on you than on the company itself. And competition can be fierce. So you want to make sure that you go into that with the mentality that it's gonna be an uphill battle for a lot of the founders out there, and they should be ready for that and have the stomach for it. But if you go with the right mentality, it will be a lot of fun.
Do you think it is inevitable, or do you think that when you start building, you can build a perfect system from the beginning?
I believe in perfect systems. Let me start with that.
Our guest today is João Moura. Joe is the founder and CEO of CrewAI. Joe has been deep in the trenches figuring out how to make multi-agent workflows. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And it's funny. I think like agents, it keeps being the topic of the year in, year out. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. So Joe, tell us about CrewAI. What are you guys building? What is CrewAI all about?
That's a great question. So let me tell you how CrewAI came to be. So it started with me building an open source like library. That is how it started. I basically was trying to build some agents myself, and I was struggling with a few things, right? I come from an engineering background for 20 years doing it, and there was just a lot of boilerplate code. I was copying and pasting things around, and it just didn't feel right. And even after I built it, there was a gap on like, all right, how I deploy this now? So what I did is I got a bunch of those learnings, and I built an open source library and I put it out there. But then it skyrocketed. We started getting so many people using it. It was insane. And funny enough, out of everyone using it, a lot of them were big enterprises. So I think the first company that ever reached out to me was Oracle. They actually got me in here in one of our events in San Francisco, and they basically pulled me aside like, hey, we're actually using CrewAI. Can you help us? Like, well, who are you? And like, oh, we're Oracle. So that was the point that I realized that there was a business in there. And then we start to actually build the business. And what we spend a lot of time focused right now is there's a race to the bottom to make building these agents extremely easy. There are so many ways that you can do this, and we can talk about that later. But where there's a huge gap is how you get those things deployed live and then running on a certain scale with everything that comes with that, from the more fancy features like guardrails and all that to the more quote unquote boring ones like privacy sanitization, PII detection, and all the governance that some of these companies require, right? So we spend a lot of our time now building across the entire stack, from the building to the deploying to the orchestrating and the management.
Okay, and there's this term scaffolding that's becoming common, right? So starting from all the context management, your memory, your vector databases, MCP, perhaps a lot of reasoning, planning. I mean, maybe include guardrails in that as well, right? So do you offer everything across the board, or and the list goes on, actually. I mean, is red teaming there or not, right? So just curious, right? So being in this space, being an educator and doing some work, practical work as well, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I gotta say, it's a great question, because if you think about the stack the stack is huge, right? You go back all the way into like the data lakes. That's where the conversation starts sometimes. Some of these companies are using like all sorts like Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, you name it. But there's a lot of data in there. And then there's an LLM layer. And then there's like an orchestration layer. And then there's an observation layer. And then there's a connection layer. And there might be a UI layer as well, because yes, you might have agents, but how your users experience it might change. Sometimes you might want to make that a conversational experience. Sometimes you might want to do something else. So it's interesting. Funny enough, when we started CrewAI, some of our investors called me like borderline crazy because I said we have no other option other than build all of it. And they're like, well, you cannot do all of it. I was like, well, we got to. There's no other option. And I think it was almost like a byproduct on like from our go-to-market strategy, right? Especially if you're building a product and you're going out and trying to sell to these big enterprises. Uh, and you got to go back like 1 year ago. Imagine me going out there and trying to sell CrewAI into a huge bank, or for example, the U.S. Department of Defense, that is one of our customers. They will say, all right, I like the platform, I want to buy it. How do I do observability? I cannot say, well, to do observability, you got to buy something else. Go, all right, I get that. And how do I do memory? So for memory, you got to buy something else. So now they're thinking, all right, I had to buy 5 products to use yours, right? And that doesn't make sense. So we end up building a lot of those things into the product. So across the board, you're going to have building with no code, building with code, MCP servers, prompting checking, PII, deployment, metrics, traces, everything is embedded. Now, there's a few things that we're exceptional at, and there's a few things that we're not the best out there. For example, there are companies that are dedicated to observability. They're doing amazing. Think about like Galileo, Arise, some of these companies, they're fine-tuning their own models to pinpoint like hallucinations and all that. And that's great. We don't go that far. But we come with batteries included that allow many public companies out there to be running their entire strategy based on Crew.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see building agentic AI different from traditional SaaS software?
Well, it is quite different. I mean, the softwares are inherently different because of the idea that they're based on LLMs, and these LLMs are very non-deterministic, right? So some of the ways that you gotta build them is different, and also I don't think we have a good way still of doing what people call like if you go back into regular engineering, there's a lot of things that we're already familiar with, like TDD or BDD. Like you have your own software development life cycle. But when you go into building agentic systems, it is a little bit different. One, there's no equivalent of TDD or BDD just yet, so you cannot necessarily test this. Now you do have this idea of evaluations that does help, so you can like make sure that you keep things in track, but it's somewhat different and tangential to that problem. And after like even after you deploy, I found that agentic systems are way more iterative than kind of like regular software development. In regular software development, you can spend a lot of time figuring out a PRD or something that you're going to be working off, and then you spend all your time building it. But with agentic systems, even if you spend all this time up front, you still find yourself adjusting a lot after you deploy, because you notice there's a lot of things that you didn't really thought out, right? A customer might send something, you might see an edge case, or you might need to change a little bit of your prompting here and there. So I do think there's something inherently different on how you do this, and also the architecture on itself. I found many people doing some architecture choices early on that they end up regretting later, right? So
Mhm.
you can think about things like you go back like a year or two on LLMs, they were not as good as they are now. So people build a bunch of these agentic systems with all sorts of like scaffolding, trying to kind of like force things to fit together. But now these models are so good that they're removing that scaffolding and delegating more into the model, right? So that's kind of like an interesting kind of like mental model for what I'm seeing. So I think there's some architectural decisions that are inherently different as well.
Yeah, and I like this. You mentioned this because we used to have this chain of thought and a lot of prompt engineering happening outside of the model. It was part of our prompts, and now models are inherently building their reasoning infrastructure or reasoning frameworks within the models now.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because when they launched this, it actually broke CrewAI for a hot second. Um,
Mm.
so the first like wave of reasoning models when like they came up with O1 and all that, these models they require somewhat of a different prompting. At least they did back in the day, because they did not want to use tools. I think like they would like use their internal reasoning process to actually offset tools, so instead of using a tool to gather information, they would try to reason their way into that information. What was a little bit, what threw some of our use cases off a little bit.
Yeah. So there's a lot of excitement when we talk to enterprises, and for that matter, any software engineer, anyone out there working as a knowledge worker, right? So there's a lot of excitement around delegating um, knowledge work to AI agents. So when you talk to enterprises, what are some realistic expectations that you set with people? I mean, do you first of all, I mean, do you think that the expectations out there and whatever is their state of the art that practitioners know, do you think there is a disconnect?
I think sometimes there is, and it's interesting because people are still kind of like catching up to a lot of this context, right? So you go back like again a year ago, all these leads would come to us, and potential customers would come to us, and their first question was, what should I do? Like, what are my competitors doing? Right. And right now we change it drastically. They show up with like 50 use cases. Like we already have everything that we want to do and all that. So that makes their life a little easier. Now, in terms of expectations on the impact on these industries and the workforce in general, I think there's kind of like a maturity curve. So a lot of these customers, they usually start thinking about efficiency gains, like how I'm going to save money with these agentic systems, right? But then as they start to build this out, they start to see more opportunity. So they grow from that into thinking about how do we generate more revenue from this. And then eventually, if they do that for long enough, they start to thinking about, oh, what are the innovation things that I can do that I was not even thinking about that could actually help with this? So it's kind of like depending on how mature the organization is, they're going to start prioritizing a few different things. But there's definitely people out there that are trying to kind of like automate as much as they can. Like we have one customer that is, it is insane what they have done the last year. Like they start with one simple use case. They have over 51 use cases live and running right now. It's insane how good like they're doing. It's saving them around $48 million already on using Crew alone. Their goal for this year is saving 100, and the goal for the next 5 years is saving 1 billion. And they're having so much fun across the globe that they decide to take one country and try to really change that one country like department, right? And see what happens there. So it's interesting to see like even companies like at like large scales, they're actually trying to experiment with these things in like in some very interesting fashions, I would say.
Yeah. And what is the most common thing that when you talk to companies, what are some of the commonly um, misunderstood aspects of agentic AI about in terms of limitations, in terms of
Mhm.
security, compliance, anything that you see within an enterprise or within, for that matter, any company.
Yeah.
What are some of the misunderstandings that you observe?
Well, first thing is like if the person is not technical enough, they might think that it's borderline magical, right? Like this is gonna come in and fix all my problems. And that's not the case. I think every engineer out there appreciates that even though those systems are remarkable once they're up and running, they still require a lot of engineering work to get them done. Like if you want to do something simple, yes, you can build with no code and that's great. But for any meaningful use case, you're gonna require to have hands on keyboard and really think about this. And these systems are going to grow on top of existing tech. They're going to connect into RAG pipelines. They're going to connect into data lakes. They're going to connect into all those different things. So I do think that there's sometimes a misunderstanding that it's going to be like, oh, I just get this agent and it's going to do work for me. Like, yes, but not really. So I think there's some component of that. And then I think there's also a huge misunderstanding that it, and it's hard to put this in words. I think people sometimes like makes the things a little bit over complex, like they over engineering some of the systems to some extent. I think there's a lot of people that are trying to think about if something, there we go, I think I got this. Doing something simple is harder. And I think a lot of engineers don't necessarily grasp that unless they're like more senior and seasoned, right? They have been in this for a while. But there's something magical about doing simple systems that senior engineers can appreciate a little more. So I almost would advise people to like how you start from a simple thing and you grow from that. But keep in mind that complexity doesn't vanish, right? You can choose where you put it, but it's not gonna go away. So the idea that you can build something simpler, I think it's something that a lot of times people can like miss the point on.
Yeah, and in many ways, agentic AI solution building, it seems more like good software engineering than more than it is AI. It is more software than it is AI.
I gotta say, I agree sometimes. I mean, yeah, it's a different kind of software. So it's something that you need to get experience. So you might need to build a few so you get good at it. But I agree. And the other thing is that the models, they're good enough. I mean, honestly, a lot of our use cases are using GPT-4o mini. I don't need like 5.2 for many of my use cases or even Oppo's 4.5, right? So I think that's the other thing is like I think a lot of the things that are getting in the way of people getting these things out there is not intelligence. The intelligence piece is quote unquote solved. Now it's about the architecture, the actual process, and the actual building and getting these things out there.
Yeah, and so you earlier in the discussion you mentioned that like 1 year ago and 2 year ago. I mean, do you think that while building these systems, things are changing so rapidly, so quickly? Um, do you think that some trade-off, some technical debt is going to be there once you actually, when you start building these systems? There are so many unknowns that are out there. Do you think it is inevitable, or do you think that when you start building, you can build a perfect system from the beginning? This is more of a
Well,
practitioner type question, by the way. Right? So,
yeah.
and yeah.
Well, I don't believe in perfect systems. Let me start with that. But I think there is, yes, one, let's recognize for what it is. This is moving too fast. Done. This is a fact, right? Now, what are the side effects from this? I think there's technical side effects and there's business side effects. And there are a few that are kind of like intertwined. In terms of the technical side effects, yes, there is going to be a lot of code that are going to be thrown away. I'm sure that will be the case. Now, there's something that is kind of like a countermeasure to that, and that is that the cost of prototyping is like extremely low now because you have Cloud Code, you have Cursor, you have all those different things. So it's becoming easier and easier for you to actually build this thing. So it's cheaper for you to throw things away, and that is fine. If you plan yourself around that, and if you have an engineering mentality in your organization that embraces that, then that's okay. You can justify working around that. Now, there's also a business component to this, right? Like where businesses, when they pick up like what they're gonna use, they are, as a byproduct of that, picking a winner, right? So it's almost like watching a race, and on the first lap, you say, this is going to be the car that's going to finish first. And yes, you might have favorites, but as a business, you might not be willing to pick a winner so early on. So a lot of this business, they're trying to figure it out how I make progress and how I adopt the technology without putting myself into a corner where I put all my eggs in one basket or I put all the bats into one thing. So I think this is playing in different ways for different parts of the market, from what products they buy to whether they use open source or not to what frameworks they choose. So there's a lot of components going around that I think it's fairly interesting. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of throwaway code. But again, building these things are getting cheaper.
Mhm. And what is the biggest challenge when we start out with POCs, right? So as you mentioned just now, Cursor is there, Claude is there. getting POCs, Replit, lovable, getting those POCs, hooking them up to LLMs. LLMs are amazing. I mean, they are getting better every day. What is the biggest chasm or the barrier that people or companies they have to cross once they have built these POCs?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you think about it, I look at the industry right now, and there is a race to the bottom to making building these agents show them easy, right? There's so many ways. You mentioned a few. So Raplet, Init, CrewAI, LangChain, Microsoft Copilot Studio, whatever it might be. Like there's endless tools that are coming up. So building is becoming easier and easier. You throw a prompt, you write some code, you get this up and running. The problem is after that, especially if you think about larger companies, like smaller companies might get away with that, but as you get larger and larger, it's almost like if you could plot a line of effort, like the building piece is now just this, and all the remainder is getting this thing live and scaled, right? So there's way more effort that goes into that, and there's not enough people focusing on bringing value to that piece. It's my opinion on the industry. So what you see is projects get built, but they never see the light of day because they don't comply with the governance, because they're not accessing the right data, because they're exposing data that they should not to, because they don't have a way to monitor and deploy this, because they don't trust it. That's it in the end of the day. They don't trust it for whatever reason, right? So there's an element here of not only building, but like creating this trust so that you can deploy and scale this thing and get this out there. And that's where we focus on our like commercial product, is building things to allow these companies to get to this stage. But I think that's what is getting a lot of these projects blocked, is a mix from, in the end of the day, confidence and trust. And that can be from the data side, that can be from the governance side, that can be from the compliance side, that can be from like the observability and traces side. So there's many different reasons that you could put behind that. But I would say that that is probably the main thing that has been getting in the way of this project seeing the light of day. Now, what I think leaders are starting to understand is that building agents, and this is going to sound funny for a second, but building agents have zero value. And this is what I mean. Unless these agents see the light of day, it's negative ROI, right? All the time that you spend build it goes to nothing unless you actually get this thing up and running. So I think we're gonna see a very hard shift this year on like, all right, we build this. Now we are about to deploy this or have deployed this, but now I want to see that business outcome.
Mhm. And you mentioned repeatedly the word trust. So
Yeah.
now there's me as a user or an end user of a workflow. I'm trusting the workflow, but now the workflow itself has some degree of autonomy, and workflow may spin up a few more nodes, few more agents under the hood, depending upon, situationally trying to understand what the problem at hand is, maybe call this tool, that tool, this MCP server, get this context, refer to the memory. Now, so when you have this kind of autonomy with the non-determinism that we know that exists in these systems, inherently these systems are stochastic. I mean, you know what to expect, but generally, directionally, they are correct. But with autonomy, this kind of non-determinism, it may not end as well as I would like to. So my question is, how do you reconcile with this dilemma? And also, when you talk to the CIOs, head of ITs, or your counterparts on your client side, uh, how do they actually, are they aware of these kind of challenges yet or not?
Oh, I think they are. Yeah, especially if like they're technical leaders. I mean, they're seeing this from a mile away. Now, there's two things in there. One is there are use cases out there that might not even need agents, right? That's thing number one. Agents is shiny, but there's no silver bullet. We all know this from engineering. And another context in engineering that I think applies to this is kiss, right? Just keep it simple. So in the end of the day, if your use case is just if this, then that, you should just do that. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be faster. It's going to be easier, right? Sometimes you might require different levels of agency. Maybe you just need one LLM call with a function calling, and you can use CrewAI flows for that. We have something that don't need to have any agents on it. You just do one single LLM call, you get that message back, you're good to go. You might want a one single agent, and that agent's going to do like everything that you need. Or you might want a many agents because you do need that agency. So that's point number one. Like, do your case actually benefits from the non-determinism that comes from the LLMs? Now, assuming that that is true, then you get to point number two, and that is, all right, so these things are going to give me different answers every time. And that is what I want because there's value on that. How I make sure that those answers fall in their spectrum that I feel comfortable with and is not something that I don't want. And that's where, honestly, I don't think there's one single solution or proven solution out there. What you do have is a combination of things that get you pretty close to 100%. So from things like guardrails, where you see a combination from using LLMs as a judge, where you basically prompt another model to sanity check if it's falling under certain criteria, to coding guardrails, where you can write point blank code that checks that output to make sure that that feels right or wrong, to this idea of doing training with these agents. And these are also some features that we have where you show these agents enough examples of what good looks like so they can basically check themselves before they wrap their work to make sure that they're falling into that kind of like that idea, to actually kind of like choosing the right models to do what you do. There's a spectrum of things that you can do. So in one side, you can do as simple as like, I'm just going to write a code to do it. On the other side, you can go, I'm going to have a fine-tuned model that's going to check for any errors on this. So what we have found out is that in production, a mix of two or three of those usually get rid of most of the problems. You might still have one or other use case, but as long as you have tracing and controls to preventing to that to actually going out, right? Blocks that going out, then you should be good. And again, those are features that already exist out there, so that makes everyone's lives easier. So I don't think we got into a solution that says like, well, this works 100% of the time and nothing's gonna pop up. But I gotta say that we got into line 9.999, and it's getting pretty good. But again, it's not magical, right? It requires you to do the work. It requires you to add the controls, add the guardrails, add the checks, and everything in between.
So regarding guardrails, do you think it is easy to add guardrails? Because um, from my experience as a practitioner, once again, what I've found is that there is this sweet spot between usability of the product and having proper guardrails. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts on how do we decide how stringent my guardrails are going to be? How do you decide really when you're building a system? Because same guardrails may not be applicable to two different scenarios within the same company, within the same organization. Same
I
guardrails
agree.
may not be applicable.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we basically have guardrails that go per task or per agent. So if you're reusing that agent, it might come with guardrails embedded on them. Or if you're having an agent do a specific task, that task might have guardrails on them. Usually, a lot of the way that I get comfortable with guardrails is through executions, right? So we, for example, have many crews or cells that we use internally, a lot on the sales side, some on the engineering side, a lot on the marketing side. So what we do is just get to run them enough times to the point that we get to understand and tune those guardrails. And I think this speaks back to kind of like what we said earlier. There's something about the systems that are way more interactive than regular engineering, right? It's just like you got to put some miles on it to make sure that you start to getting the things that you like. And eventually, once that you have put enough miles on it, it starts to create more optionality. We do have customers, for example, that have gone as far as fine-tune models. We even have fine-tuned the model ourselves for one of our marketing use cases. But in the end of the day, I think like you only get there by putting miles on your use case, by getting execution. So I don't have one single guardrail that I reuse every time. It's very much per use case. So a use case might require me to write actual code guardrails. They're going to check something. Other use cases might require me to just use LLM as a judge. And the LLM that I use might change. And I also have some controls. For example, we have a hallucination control. So if there is hallucination happening, you can control after a certain kind of like threshold. It basically can like halts the execution or it does something else with the execution. So again, I think with enough options, you can figure out what your use case needs. But especially on the complex use cases, is very much a use case per use case basis. Is not anything magical yet.
Mm-hmm. Uh, and yeah, so from your experience, what I hear is that you're saying that basically once you start putting miles on an agent, I'm assuming that you're referring to, I mean, you use it and then discover what guardrails might be needed, right? So there's no silver bullet, no recipe for setting up proper guardrails. Use it and figure out what guardrails are needed.
I mean, what we do on Crew is on our enterprise product, we have a feature that observes your executions and pinpoint like things that you might want to improve, right? So like, oh, you might improve this and that. And even depending on how you build it, it can actually improve it for you. So it goes in and change your agents and tasks to improve it for you. So we try to help you get there by showing you what good looks like. But in the end of the day, every use case will have a little more specific details. But yes, you got to actually use it to improve it. But we do pinpoint like, hey, here are things that you could do that would actually get into a better place.
Mhm. And guardrails can also, if you look at it, right? So one of the fundamental problems with your LLM-based guardrails is someone can, you know, talk their way into deceiving the agent, right? So, you can sort of deceive, just beat around the bush and eventually get the agent to do something. And then you can have classic machine learning based guardrails, or you can have coding regex based guardrails, right? So no mention of this word. So, I mean, how do you, when someone is out there, a software engineer implementing these agents, what would be your recommendation to them? How should they approach? Have you found any of this type of guardrails? Do you use a combination of these guardrails? How do you approach it?
Yeah, I end up using a combination for the most complex ones where I might want to do LLM guardrails for certain things, and I might want to do code guardrails for others. And when you do coding, again, the sky's the limit because it's regular coding. So you can bring like a regular ML if you want to. You can bring regular kind of like classification or regression models, or you can add regular kind of like logic and or even do whatever you want in there, right? So we usually use a combination of those depending on the use case. And again, we do have some things like the hallucination checks that are kind of like pre-built that you can use as well. That usually is helpful for some of these use cases. But it usually is a combination. I do like LLM as a judge. To your point, when you think about prompt injection or even like MCP poisoning now, because MCP is actually being largely adopted, uh, you gotta add protections on that. So we do add protections around some of those things on the enterprise side. And the way that you do that, the way that we do that is a combination of having a fine-tuned model that detects kind of like prompt injections or PII and things like that from it's a spectrum, right? You got to choose. If you don't want to add too much latency, you might do something as simple as regesp. But if you care more about making sure that you're filtering out anything, then you activate this kind of like fine-tuned model that's going to find out these issues. So in terms of MCP poisoning and prompt injection, it's almost like a separate topic in my mind, but with similar solutions. But in terms of guardrails, I would say that I probably find myself using a combination of both LLM as a judge and coding. I usually start with LLM as a judge and I just go to coding like guardrails if I actually need it. I have been thinking a lot about how you build the systems, and I have been delegating more and more to the models as much as I can, given how good they're getting, and then just falling back into code if needed.
Okay. And in terms of evals, right? So how do you set up Evals for an agent? Once again, I mean, is it again the same mileage recommendation? Use it and then figure out how to evaluate it. So if you bring a new customer on board, right? So a new company comes in, start using CrewAI, and now they set up this agent, and the first thing that comes up is how do we know that it continues to perform as we add more context, as we add, maybe we switch to a better, supposedly better model, right? So, how do we know that it is not, the agent is not messing up on existing queries that it was doing very well on in the past?
Yeah, that's a great thing. I think the good thing about that at Evolve specifically is that it's very unlikely that you're creating a new use case, at least early on, out of the thin air. So you probably already have something that you're automating. So you have like an understanding of what good looks like and even examples that you can use to actually battle test your use case. So for that, you don't need to put as many miles on it because you can just run through the same thing and see, all right, is the outputs actually compatible or within the range of what I think good is. Now, the good thing is was that you have that, you can kind of like almost use that as a testing suite, right? So as you change it, you make sure that it's you can like performs well on those. How you measure that quality, there's a few different ways. We do have a feature that does that automatically, and that is using LLM as a judge. So basically, prompt another model to evaluate based on the agent and the task and the output how good that was, so you can see if that deviates over time. So it's less about, oh, from a 0 to 10 this needs to be 10 or this needs to be 8, whatever it might be. It's more about, does this deviates aggressively? Is there like, it does like, do we have outliers or do we have a constant deviation? So if you ship a new version of your agentic system and before it would get a constant quality of 7 or 8, whatever it might be, but now it's dropping all the way to 5s or 6, well, then there's probably something that is happening on there, right? And you want to look at this. So it's almost like the deviation matter more than the number itself. Is more like, is there any changes in here that drastically impacted performance on some of these use cases, right? And in terms of new models, we actually have a feature that we call CrewAI testing. So that allows you to run the same agents with, and this is open source feature, by the way. We have it on enterprise as well, but you can use on your terminal. It allows you to run the same agents with like any models. So you can do run 4.0, 4.0 mini, Gemini 3, and Sonnet 4.5, and it kind of like spits out like what is the quality of the output for you, how much time it took, how many tokens it used. So you get to pick and choose what is the best model for your use case. This helps a lot when new models launch, right? And there's new models launching every like 2 weeks now. So you probably want to say like, all right, should I migrate to this new model or not? Will I benefit from this? So this is kind of like trying to help customers get to make that call.
But quality is subjective, right? So it depends upon the task the agent is designated for.
Yeah,
Is it a summarization agent? Is it I don't know, router agent? Is it a Q&A agent, right? So medical, it can vary based on the task and based on the industry and your tolerance level, right? So 70% similarity might be good enough for marketing, but may not be good enough for a regulated industry.
1,000%. And I think the way that we see that in the real world is a lot of these companies usually starts with internal use cases, right? Like they start with testing things internally, and if that works out, then eventually they moved into customer or user facing use cases. But I think the way that this translated into the business impact is a lot of back office kind of like use cases or marketing or go to market use cases, right? Things that helps you kind of like get these things running, but where you still have like human the loop, for example. And I'm actually seeing a lot of human the loop kind of like use cases now, kind of like popping up where people basically wants to either be in the loop or on the loop, right? Where like an agent like might ping them to ask confirmation or feedback or something, or they can actually just be observing everything that the agent does and intervene if necessary. So that is also another way that you can get to kind of like pretty remarkable results while still keeping a very high bar in terms of like the quality of the output.
Okay. So we talked about guardrails and evals, right? So that's more um, one aspect of the entire an agentic AI workflow. Now, the most important aspect is context, right? So an MCP is, anyone who's dealing with agentic workflows, agentic AI knows about MCPs now, right?
Yep.
But when we go and start using these MCP servers that these companies are rushing to release, many of them are barely usable. How has your experience been? And do you think that in longer term is MCP going to is here to stay? And also, I mean, do you expect these companies to release better MCP servers? I don't want to name names in a podcast, but some of the big companies, the MCPs that they have released, they're terrible.
Yeah, I hear you. One, I think MCP definitely is not going anywhere. I think like people are gonna start like people are already adopting it, and I think it has become somewhat of a standard. And it has all its flaws. I'm not a huge fan of a few things. One, I think out of the gate it was a little bit over engineered. I don't think we need an entire new protocol for this. I'm a huge fan of HTTPS, so why
Yeah, you
not?
think, I mean, it is basically REST sugar-coated as,
Exactly.
rebranded with something? Because a lot of people will take strong exception with the statement, but I will let you, right? So I also think, but some people they get offended when you tell them, hey, it is REST wrapped as a different protocol, right?
I mean, honestly, like I don't mind. I just think that like I think there must be an easier way, and that could be as simple as just like a JSON standard, right? As long as we agree on the format, that should be good enough. But in the end of the day, I think it also brings a few good things with that. And the idea is it did get accepted, right? So a lot of these companies are now actually using and deploying MCPs and all that. It's
Mhm.
funny because when we noticed the pattern on MCP, we decided to build a feature around it. And when
Mhm.
we start to go into our customers and ask them, like, hey, here, we're bringing 2,000 MCP servers to you, that was not what they wanted. They're like, well, that's great, but we actually have 20 internal MCPs and we want to use those. So it's almost like they want to have an internal registry of their MCPs, but they don't necessarily care about the public ones. So it's like more the things that they have built internally. What I found that it was interesting, and I didn't see it coming. I thought they would care more about the all the public ones that they now could use. In the end of the day, the standardization does brings value because it makes it easier for people to adopt things and to migrate. So to our point, to what we were saying earlier, if everyone's using MCP, then you don't feel like you're picking up winners because you might be using, for example, Salesforce today and you're using MCP to integrate with them. But if you migrate to HubSpot in the future, then you can just change to use that MCP and everything should still work. So I think like the standard is beneficial, but I don't think MCP is going anywhere. I think like people are going to stick with this. It got enough adoption that I think it has enough like enough acceleration and mass now.
Mhm. And you expect any of that Equifax or Target or other data breaches? I mean, do you expect any news anytime soon with MCPs?
Yeah. Yes, I mean there's a long way to go, right? I remember still when we had the whole like GitHub fiasco, right? With like they launched MCP and leaked a bunch of information that we're not supposed to. So I definitely think there will be more of that until you can like MCP matures a little more. There's a lot of more things that people want to implement. And again, it does create new problems, right? We were just talking about a prompt injection and MCP poisoning. Well, like MCPs do come with like that one extra layer and then how you guard that layer and how you like trace that layer and now you also have A2A coming on top of that. So I think we're not short of challenges in the industry.
Yeah, and what about role-based access control? Because MCPs usually, when companies set them up, they set them up with some elevated permissions, a service account with elevated permissions. How do you make sure that they have a lot of autonomy, and with that autonomy, they can go and access information that should not have access to, and on the other hand, right? So. maybe take some action. You mentioned HubSpot, right? So we use HubSpot MCP, and now there are so many actions that I can take in my CRM. So how do we manage that?
Yeah, I gotta say, like, I agree with you. One, role-based level of access is a must for this, right? Because you want to make sure that you're giving only the necessary scope. And not only that, I think it's not only about the permissioning and the data, because that's number one, but I would say number two is also about keeping these LLMs like efficient, right? If you throw too many actions at them, like you start to get kind of diminished returns from all that, right? It starts to get in the way of they actually performing because you start to running out of context window and not whatnot. So I do think there's a problem with that. With CrewAI, we have basically three types of like integrations. So we have what we call agentic apps, and you can think about those as regular OAuth, right? And OAuth kind of fixes some of these problems. I
Mhm.
do think that there's a ways that you can make OAuth even more secure, and we're exploring some of that. Where, for example, you might do a quote unquote two-factor authentication where you not only have the OAuth, but you might want to do a certificate. So it's not only, well, whenever this agent is tool, if I'm the one that is running the agent, is going to use my OAuth connection, but also this needs to be running from this specific CrewAI server because that's the one that has the certificate. So there's a few things that you can do that actually allows you to be even more secure on that. But we do find that for most of those systems, usually OAuth works better because it comes with that embedded scope aspect. And as long as you can change that scope in runtime based on the person triggering what we do by default, it allows you to make sure that the agent's not getting access to neither more or less than what it should do. So I do think that that is a problem with like MCP in general. So you might need to add an extra layer on your own implementation, either around doing that RBAC, or you might want to do like a OAuth or something else for that.
Okay. So let's switch gears toward more of entrepreneurship. So you are a first-time founder. And there are many first-time AI founders at different stages. Some are still thinking and they want to build an AI product. Others do have some prototype. They are trying to get some traction. Um, what is your advice to an AI founder who is either already has, I mean, those who have ventured into this space already, or they are considering venturing into AI and entrepreneurship? What would be your advice to them?
Well, it's interesting because like right now there's a lot of hype on AI, right? So everyone's trying to jump on that train. Um, I look back when I started Crew in 2023. That was October 2023 was when I released the first version of our open source side of things. And I remember the decision for me. The reason why I decided to do this, and maybe this is the advice that I would leave to people if they're dwelling whether or not to do it, is the opportunity cost here is huge. If you really think about this, like again, I know everyone keeps talking about this, but I think there's truth to that. This is as big, if not bigger, than the internet was, right? And between those two, it took us only 30-ish years. So if you think about it, this might be like your once in a lifetime opportunity to do something in such a hot and emerging tech and market, right? Yes, technology is going to keep evolving, but you never know when you're going to get another wave of those. So you might find yourself sitting around for a long time if you don't take your chance right now. So I remember that for me was a big thing that decided me to like, all right, let me just do it because I think like it's going to take like 30 years for another thing to come by that's going to be as big as this, and I don't want to miss this out. And I gotta say, I'm super like glad that I did it. The other thing that I would say though is be very mindful that it is because it's very hot and a lot of the AI tools out there can impact many industries. That means that it's very competitive. So there's a bunch of different like companies from all different sizes. They're going to be going over these opportunities, and competition can be fierce. So you want to make sure that you go into that with the mentality that it's going to be an uphill battle for a lot of the founders out there, and they should be ready for that and have the stomach for it. But if you go with the right mentality, it would be a lot of fun.
And will I be worth $100 million, so like next year or 2 years?
CrewAI specifically?
No, I mean anyone who's venturing into it, right? So because there's this common notion, right? So I mean, let me phrase it differently. I think I will get rich quickly, or I will get rich within the next few years, right? So I mean, do you have any advice to that mind?
Yeah, that is that is just like couldn't be further from the truth, right? In the end of the day, honestly, like for everyone that's a first time founder, what I would say is you hear other founders talking about how quote unquote terrible it is and how much work it is, and they're not kidding. It is a lot of work. I think the only other thing that I can kind of like draw a parallel with is having a kid, where everyone tells you like having a kid's a lot of work, and you're like, yeah, but I think I'm good with kids, but then you have it and it feels like a truck ran over you and you didn't even see it coming. I think like running a company is similar. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, being a founder, it is fun. It might sound like you have a lot of control in your destiny, and you actually do, but it does comes with a lot of strings attached. For example, right now, and we have grown quite a lot, so it's a different dynamic. But whenever I get a problem on the company and that problem bubbles up all the way to me, that means that no one else was able to fix it. That means that all my days are fixing the most terrible problems that no one else could. So it stops being fun extremely quickly as you get something like that. It's still fun in so many ways, but it's a grind. It's not like a get rich quick scheme, right? And you got to think that, yes, is there a very strong appetite for investment out there? Yes, there's definitely is. There's a lot of money going around, and investors have a strong appetite to make sure they're not missing any important deals. But these investors, they're not numb, right? They, if anything, they're very smart people and they're savvy and they have seen some of these waves come and go. So they're not going to write checks like unless they actually bet on you and the company. And maybe a final piece of advice that I would leave in there is, especially if you're about to start, right? And you're a first time founder and about to start, and you want to get like in the VC can like attract you and raise money and kind of like go from there, you got to get a sense that the first check that you're going to get is going to probably be more of a bet on you than on the company itself. Yes, the idea needs to be there, the business needs to be there, but it's going to be a bet on you as a founder. So if you're a first time founder, you need to make sure that you build a very strong case why you are the right person for them to bet on. So as you go out there, you got to be honest to yourselves, like why I should be the one doing this, and not only that, but how can I tell that story, right? How can I show support? So in my case, for example, I was running with Clearbit for 5 years before starting Crew. I was doing AI. I was basically director of AI engineering in there, and I stuck out to the whole process all the way to the acquisition by HubSpot. So I had seen some of like what was going to go from like a little less than $10 million to over 40, $50 million and get through an acquisition. And not only do that, but then when I left HubSpot to start CrewAI, all the founders from Clearbit invested in Crew. In Dharmesh, the CTO of HubSpot, invested in Crew. So that gave a lot of signal for whoever wanted to back Crew. Well, everyone that worked with this guy in the last 5 years is giving him money. There got to be something about him, right? And so I would say whatever is that thing for you, you got to figure it out, because the easiest you make to build your case, the easier your life will be. But sorry, that was an unsolicited VC advice.
No, absolutely. I think this is the kind of practical advice that many people do not many first-time founders do not understand these aspects of getting a startup off the ground. Really, I mean, a lot of people think that they are technically capable and they can build things. That's all it takes, right? But definitely, I can relate to many of the things that you mentioned. So you decided to open source CrewAI, if I understand correctly. And such business models, they involve either offering SaaS or managed services, perhaps some kind of enterprise support, consulting services, some kind of seal of approval, some certifications. Which one of these are you? Or all of these? I don't know.
It's interesting. Well, there's there's two kinds of open source plays out there historically, right? There's more, but there's two big ones. One is kind of like the Mongo like approach, right? Where you have an open source and you have an enterprise product, and people basically upgrade from one into the other. They start using open source, they eventually hit some sort of ceiling, and they want a better support or whatever it might be. They jump into a commercial product. And then you have another playbook that is very known that is kind of like the Vercel model, where you have Next.js and you don't stop using Next.js, but you bring whatever you're doing with Next.js into Vercel, right?
Mhm.
So between those two, we're more the latter. So you're
More of the
starting.
managed services model. I mean, that's what Vercel is. I mean,
Yeah, more of the
bring
managed
everything.
services model. Exactly. So what that means is you don't upgrade from open source. You still bring whatever you're doing with open source into our commercial offering. So that's kind of like the play that we have in there. And the reason why we decide to open source is because we do realize that right now there is like probably 10x more demand for prototyping than
Mhm.
production. It's we're very early on this as an industry, so
Mhm.
there's a lot more demand for like, I want to build agents very quickly, then like I want these things to go into production. That's still catching on. Now we open source the building part, so that's the framework. So you can build in there, you can do a lot of things with it, you can test it, you can run it. There's a lot of things on there. And the commercial side is for once these companies actually want to move those things into the wild and get them into production, right? So it's almost like when you start to get benefit from it and you start to get value from that, then you can choose to also share some of that value with us, and we're going to bring you more features to help you do it, right? So that's a little bit of the
More like the
model.
Cloudera type model. Then, when you really start using it, you're deep into it, then you will need support, right? So
It's not
perhaps.
support. So what we do is we have an entire platform, and that
Mhm.
platform's a lot of features. So you're going to be able to deploy in there. You're going to be
Mhm.
able to build with no code. You're going to be able to orchestrate external agents. You're going to be able to bring your ServiceNow, your Salesforce, your SAP agents. You're going to
Mhm.
have a bunch of integrations built to you. You're going to have the traces. So all those are into the commercial product, right? All those would be paid features. And usually people just need those if they're actually moving into a production environment. If you're a big corporation and you say like, hey, I want to orchestrate for example, PepsiCo is a customer of ours, and they use CrewAI to orchestrate ServiceNow agents. So that's the very enterprise feature. If you're doing that, you're a company and you're getting value from this, right? So that's kind of like where we come. So yes, is there support embedded? Yes, but I would say that probably the main driver is because people want those features, right? They really want, oh, I want to deploy this with one click. I want to have all the traces and logs. I want to route this using open telemetry into my existing pipelines. I want to be able to bring my external agents. I want to
Mhm.
be able to redact any PII from my logs. I want to be able to use row-based level of access. So it's the combination of those features that pull me people forward. If I had to simplify, I would say there's four, maybe five main things that people like come to our commercial product. First one is this idea of centralizing use cases, tools, and agents, right? So if you're a CIO and people are building all sorts of things across your organization, the idea of having a central place where you're bringing everything from your custom ones to your other providers, that is just amazing. People love it. The second is the idea that you can allow people with code and no code. So the commercial product is an entire no code platform. And the best thing about that is they're reusing the same building blocks. So
Mhm.
they're going to be reusing the same tools, the same agents. So allows the technical team to kind of like pave the road for the non-technical people to come
Mhm.
and use it, right? Then the third thing I would say is this ability to basically orchestrate these external agents. So let's
Mhm.
say that I have a ServiceNow agent, or let's say that I have kind of like a Salesforce agent or a SAP agent, and I want to orchestrate them. This allows me to do it. And I would say the fourth one is kind of like the non-sexy, check all the enterprise boxes, right? So the fact that we deploy this on
The
their
most important one, by the way, right? So the last one
exactly.
is not, it does not look as appealing, but probably this is the most important one for CIOs, right?
It is, yes. It's deploying on their hyperscalers, allowing them to bring any models. He's doing the RBAC, he's doing the PII, he's their certification and all that. And the 51, I would say, is less support and more training. So we do a lot of training with our customers where we fly out to Korea, to India, to Mexico, to Canada, and we do some like 3 days, 5-day workshops, teaching them not only the how to use the platform, but how to think about agentic systems, how to build their use cases, how to organize their use cases, and everything in between. It's kind of like giving them the playbook as well.
That's great. I mean, fun stuff. Um, so naturally, the question that comes to my mind is now, I see a lot of similarities with LangChain. So how do you compare, what is LangChain doing and what are you doing? And are you both competing like head on at the moment and winner takes all, or you think you're in different domains or slightly overlapping but different?
So it's interesting when I think right now agents is such a huge industry. So if you think about it, like there is kind of like a many we talking about the DoD, PepsiCo being a customer, DocuSign, AB InBev, the largest brewer in the world. So if you think about it, what that means is we have customers on so many verticals, and these verticals have so many horizontals in them, from marketing to sales to back office. I think what that means is this market's huge. Because of that, everyone's gonna go after it. So you're gonna have hyperscalers like Microsoft, AWS, Google. You're gonna have model providers themselves like OpenAI, Anthropic. You're going to have incumbents like the ones that we mentioned, ServiceNow, Salesforce, SAP, Workday. And you're going to have startups as well. We're going to have LangChain, CrewAI. So all these players are going after this market from different angles. And when you're competing with that many people, there's going to be two things. One, there's going to be a mental share competition, right? People that are thinking about LangChain, people are thinking about CrewAI. And there's going to be a kind of like dollar amount competition. In the end of the day, I'm about to close a customer. Am I competing with LangChain as or now? So in terms of like competition with dollar amount, no, we almost never come across with them in terms of like competing offers, right? One is most of like their business and their revenue is observability, is like their Langsmith, like traces and all that. And we go way beyond that. That's a part of what we do, but is not kind of like what we do the best, right? So our focus is more on the orchestration, on the management side of the systems. But we do have a lot of competition on the mental share because both of us have open source libraries, they with LangGraph and as with CrewAI that allows you to build those things out there in the wild. If you think about it, it's like it's two very different opinions on how you build agents, right? One is more focused on this idea of graphs and basically doubling down on this idea of control, where you can put all these different scaffolds into these things. And with CrewAI, we have more of a spectrum where you can use flows if you want to have some control, and you can do events-based instead of graphs, or you can opt into full agency, where you're just creating agents and letting the LLMs work together. But it's kind of like a different approach. One, Harrison is actually an investor in CrewAI, the CEO of LangChain. So that is a fun fact to you. And in the end of the day, when I think about like when I think about LangGraph, I think they're great at a few things. I don't like the graph implementation though. That's my personal take. I think it'll make it extremely hard because a lot of engineers can go through a career in engineering and not even touch a graph. So I think like imply that they need to learn about nodes and edges and all that, things that they have never seen. And what I have seen out there is that it becomes harder for you to scale and change. It becomes a maintenance burden down the road. So I don't like it because of that. And that's the reason why we never implemented graphs for us. And we decided to go with more of an events approach where it's similar to mental models like Redis or Sidekick or things that engineers have seen a little more often out there. But there's definitely like different ways that you can build agents. And I have seen amazing use cases being built with LangGraph as well. So there's no dig on them. It's just my personal take an opinion on how I would go about build these agents. Funny enough, we did our event in November, CrewAI Signal, and one of the speakers was Ender Yang. Ender Yang is one of the investors in CrewAI, and I asked him about it, and his take is he's thinking that more and more as his models are getting better, people are going to start delegating even more to the LLMs to the point that even maybe our events-based automation gets displaced and Cruise is going to be the only thing people are going to be using because you just throw as much in the model as you can. So I don't know if I'm as confident as him on that. I think the jury is still out, but I found it interesting that he has that take that in the end of the day, there's going to be no events and no graphs. It's going to be only agents working, and you're going to create groups of agents that are going to work together. Let's see how the market will go. But that's it. So yes, we compete with LangChain maybe on the mental share a little bit, but not necessarily on the dollar amount. The products are different.
And so you mentioned something very interesting, like Andrew's comment. I think all of us generally agree that models are going to do more and more heavy lifting. And now, to what extent is actually probably what you disagree or you have a differing opinion on, right? So, as long as you can structure the context and give it to the model, and then just route things properly, and that's all what you need, right? So, if you just build something, build the context, keep it secure, secure the autonomy aspect of it. Eventually, models are getting better. I think if we compare the models that we had like 2.5 years ago and now, I think there is a day and night difference right now, right? So the first time when we moved from, I think, an 8K context window to the first time when we had the 32K context window, I don't know which model, 3.5 to 4, or some major transition that happened, and suddenly your agents started looking amazing, right? So, and that's the most fascinating part.
And it's interesting, yeah, to your point, and we talked about how things are changing fast, right? We go back a year ago and or maybe 2 years ago, and context was the main thing, right? Every launch was like, oh, the context window now is 128, it's 256, it's a million, right? But now no one even talks about context anymore. It's almost like this got solved, right? So we don't care about the context. It's just like it works. So it's funny to see how that goes. And yeah, I agree. I gotta say, I do agree with Winder. I think like the models don't seem to have hit a ceiling yet. A bunch of the models that we are using have actually been trained on old GPUs. So now that we have newer GPUs, I wonder what the new models will look like and what they are cooking with that. It's going to take a while for them to come around, but I'm excited to see what that will look like. And not only that, I do think that we're going to be removing a lot of the scaffolds. So I think it's going to be interesting. I just don't know how fast that will happen and to what degree, but I definitely agree that that's the trend.
And as you mentioned, right, so our focus has shifted from context window to just context engineering now, right? So it's about not how it is processed, but versus how it is organized to be given to the model. But then one choice that I have is I take everything that can potentially fit in the context window. Like I have a model that 1 million, 2 million context window. But then I have this cost concern, right? So do you think that just like we moved our discussions moved from context window to now context engineering, do you think down the road, maybe 6 months, a year down the road, as the models improve these context engineering tools, MCP, and then all of them, they mature, then the real discussions are going to be around cost management and observability and autonomy and security and compliance and governance. So do you see it headed that way?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that that is kind of like the way that we're going. And in terms of like cost, it's interesting because there's two approaches, right? One, definitely feels like there's a run to the bottom in terms of like the cost, right? Every model keeps getting better and better, and like some amazing models. What are we talking about? 4.0 mini. It's a pretty incredible model. It's now so damn cheap, or even 4.1 mini that I think it's even cheaper for now. I'm not sure, but like, there's that. And there are other models that are just not going to low prices, right? You think like about Claude Opus 4.5. That thing is expensive, but people still use it because it's exceptional in coding, right? And people really care about that. So I do wonder like how the things will fall if people are gonna care more about like, all right, cost now it's irrelevant because it's so cheap that it only matters at a crazy scale, and once that we're getting at that scale is because we have like very high confidence that it's going to pay off. Or if it's going to be a mix of like that plus, no, this use case actually deems a very specific model that we know that is capable to handle it. So we're going to double down on that. I think it's going to be more of a mix. But yeah, beyond that, I think like enterprises are already moving away from it and they're thinking about the security, they're thinking about the compliance, they're thinking about the metrics, they're thinking about the reporting and everything's in between. And I think this will be the trend. In the end of the day, it's funny because we keep talking about AI being transformational. We keep talking about AI agents being transformational, right? But what I think we need to see now in 2026, and it's a lot of my conversations with the CIOs and CTOs out there and CEOs, is there are 7 stocks in the SP 500. They're really benefiting from this. But the promise is that remaining 493 will be the ones that will benefit from it, right? So how we get that to happen? We need to close that bridge. So I love the fact that we are working with like real businesses, right? It's always fun when you close a business that everyone knows. You close kind of like a DocuSign that is a customer of ours, and everyone knows DocuSign. All right, this is great.
Mm-hmm.
But I gotta say, I got even more excited when we close like a PepsiCo or a Johnson and Johnson or an AB InBev, right? Whereas businesses that people like, yes, PepsiCo and Johnson people know, but AB InBev, 3 of every 4 beers sold in the globe, it's theirs.
Mm-hmm.
People don't necessarily know the brand, but these like a real businesses making billions of dollars and
Mm-hmm.
trying to reinvent themselves with AI. So I think it's very interesting. And I almost like sometimes I like these customers better just because you can have such an immense impact into their business that it's incredible.
And from your standpoint, right? So having a logo, I mean, maybe there's a mind share value as opposed to dollar value, right? Sometimes you need those customers for that perception.
Yeah, there's definitely perception out there, but I think also like it changes the adoption, right? I think, for example, tech companies, even if you think like, for example, the Ubers, the Raplets, the DoorDashes of the world, like the tech cool kids, right?
Mhm.
They're using open source. They're gonna be using CrewAI. They're gonna be using kind of like LangChain. They're gonna be using everything out there, but they're not buying platforms. They might buy, for example,
Mhm.
traces, observability, and all that for sure. But because they have such technical savvy teams, they are gonna try building it first, right? And eventually they're gonna come around and say, like, all right, now 2 years later, we're ready to buy something, right? So I think the adoption pattern is a little different, depending on kind of like how tacky a business is. I think they're
Mhm.
more inclined to try building first, especially because things are moving so fast and we talked about this. And eventually, as things consolidate, then they might change their instance to like, all right, let me actually go out there and buy something now that checks all my boxes. So I think there is a component of that. But yeah, there's definitely perception and closing cool kids.
Great. So let's come to our closing thoughts. What are you most excited about in general in agentic AI at CrewAI?
That's a great question. I think honestly, coming to this year, the thing that I'm super excited about is we're getting some amazing business outcomes. I think like I always like it's funny because I always knew like once that you build your first agent, at least for me it was like that. Once that I built my first agent, it clicked for me. I was like, holy, can I swear on this? I'm not sure if I can.
We'll print it out. We will edit it. Go
like
for it.
like holy, I want to automate my life away.
Hmm.
Because this is so good, right? Like I really want to automate it and I can see the benefits. But then between that and other people seeing it, and then between that people seeing it, and then building it, and then building in between deploying, and then deploying and actually the outcomes coming, it you gotta let it like it gotta mature into that. But now again, we have companies that are saving like millions of dollars on this. So the thing that I'm most excited is telling those stories. I think like coming into this year, see like some of the fruition of everything that agents are actually capable of and seeing the actual impact on this businesses day to day on the people's lives. I think that will be extremely exciting. So when I think about the non-technical side of things that I'm excited, I think that it's part of that. When I think about the technical things that I'm excited, well, there's a lot of improvements to be done still. So just as an example, we did one experiment last week that got all of our agents to run 5 times faster. Like that's 5 times faster. That's 500%. It's insane, right? And it was something so silly that I know I didn't see before. So there's an entire thing around all right how we got ourselves here. But I'm excited about those improvements. The other thing is we have kind of like an internal goal that is I'm a cursor user. I love cursor. For me, it's an amazing tool. Um, and I think
You
they're
still code? You
so
code?
yeah, yeah, oh, daily. I my engineering team probably wishes that I didn't.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And probably your investors as well, right? So your board and your investors would also tell you, hey, stop coding now, right?
I mean, yes, but like they know that I get a lot of excitement from
Yes.
it and all
Yeah,
that.
I
But
can
I
imagine.
don't. The good thing is I don't get in the way, so I don't get any tasks no more, and I don't get kind of like any like I learned the hard way that if I try to do anything that is critical, I become a blocker. So I don't do
Yeah.
any of that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would be lying if I didn't say that on the weekend. I have a crazy idea, and I'm like, oh, let me try this out. So there's definitely a lot of that still happens, and then people take my PRs from there and make them look good. But the whole idea is I love Cursor, amazing tool. A lot of like the agentic behavior really helps, but I wish everyone's agent was as good as Cursor agents. And that's like my personal goal with Crew. I like everyone that builds an agent in CrewAI, by default, their agent should be as good as the Cursor agent that I hold to a very high standard. Whatever that agent might be for the person, right? If it's cloud code, that's fine. But in the end of the day, that's one thing that we're shooting for. And there's a lot of changes we're doing based on that. So we have a bigger thing that we're doing. It's not out yet, but it's basically going to unblock agents like custom agents that you build with Crew to run for hours or even days if needed. Right now, you can do it, but it's a lot more work. But we want to make that kind of like extremely easy. So we're changing a lot of things to kind of like allow for those kind of use cases as well.
Okay. Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I had a great time, and yeah, I hope the community and everyone watch it had a good time too.
Yeah. Thank you.